this, of course, is Bryan Adams with his mega smash hit Everything I Do It For You, the highest selling song of 1991 in 6 different countries, including the US, the UK and Australia. Coming second to that song in the end of year chart would be Nothing to Be Ashamed Of. And in Australia, that honour went to an EP by the band Rat Cat, an Aussie band that even most Aussies might struggle to remember nowadays. What do they sound like? Well, here's the lead song from the Tingles EP called That Ain't Bad. Well, those guitars are certainly a bit more aggressive than I would have expected. Certainly very loud and present in the mix, don't you think? Amazingly, Tingles reached the number 1 spot in May 1991, 4 months before Smells Like Teen Spirit was released, and 6 months before Nevermind even entered the Aussie Top 50. So incredibly, Rat Cat seemed to burst onto the charts before alternative rock truly exploded worldwide, given it didn't exactly fast-track the Australian music scene. I mean, we had Silverchair, who were basically a Nirvana Pearl Jam hybrid, dominate the charts a year after Kurt Cobain died. So when shit like that is happening on the Aussie charts, Rat Cat's timing somewhat astounds me. Now here's another mega hit from 1991. The Horses by Aussie singer Daryl Braithwaite. If you're not familiar with it, well, it's basically Australia's unofficial national anthem now. It spent 2 weeks at number 1, but in June 1991, it went down to number 2 thanks to Rat Cat, this time with Don't Go Now, the lead single from their second album, Blind Love. An album which also debuted on the album chart the same week Don't Go Now reached number 1. Guess which position that album debuted in? Exactly. So not only were they the first Aussie indie band to have a major impact on the charts, but that week Rat Cat also became the first Aussie band in history to hold the number 1 spot on the singles and albums charts simultaneously. So what was it about these guys that had both the indie and pop crowds united in their appreciation? Well, they're still poppy as hell despite their indie origins. They seem especially influenced by the rock and roll and bubblegum pop of the 50s and 60s. Maybe that got older listeners behind them as well as the younger ones. Not sure about the sudden tolerance of punk distortion though. Of course you could ask that question about Nirvana too, so maybe it was just about time that sound had a sort of uprising. Were they bringing anything new to the table? Well, apparently in their earliest days they were very derivative of English pop-punk band Buzzcocks, according to this one guy. But based on a song like this, I think I can see where he's coming from.
Sorry for the car crash. We hope you don't mind. We've killed all your family and loved ones, and let that be said.
On Tingles, the blend of punk energy and fun vocal lines remained, but with a much wider range of influences shown. They weren't doing too many things for the first time, but they took all these influences and turned them into songs that are unmistakably Rat Cat. Each track on Tingles effectively shows its own style with a different range of influences. You have That Ain't Bad, which is driving power pop with a simple tight guitar solo, similar to the brand of power pop that Weezer became famous for. Mind you, this beats Weezer's debut album by nearly 4 years. The goofy title track is like a blend of the 50s and late 80s alternative, which reminds me of what the Pixies were doing at that time with their albums after Doolittle. Both fantastic albums, by the way. Following track Don't Go in the Water brings to mind the idea of teenage tragedy songs that were apparently big in the 50s and 60s, though with more of a gothic twist. Getting away from this world slows the tempo down further, and I don't really know what individual influences I'm hearing on it, but the song is awesome regardless. Not sure how I feel about it using radio recordings from the 1986 Space Shuttle Challenger launch though. You know, the one that exploded and killed all 7 crew members. Beyonce used part of the same recordings in her song EXO and definitely got criticism for that. So yeah, I don't know. Other than that though, the song is stellar. Then there's Skin, which is a more raucous take on the punky pop of That Ain't Bad. And lastly is My Bloody Valentine, which is like an Elvis love song meets more contemporary alternative bands of the time like the Jesus and Mary Chain and maybe the Cocteau Twins. And their following album, Blind Love, is pretty much more of the same, with more old school influences like in the 12-bar blues of Yes I Wanna Go and the sort of rockabilly style riff of Run and Hide, and frontman Simon Day brings back the slightly unsettling whispery vocal style from My Bloody Valentine on songs like The Wonder of You. But the album does feel a bit more sugary than Tingles, and this especially applies to the previously mentioned Don't Go Now, a giddy love song with one of those rock meets dance music rhythms that appears to be typical of the early 90s to me. And their other single from the album, Baby Baby, which couldn't replicate their previous chart success, only reaching number 21, has jangly verses reminiscent of 60s psychedelia like the Byrds, before the feedback and chugging guitars of the chorus bring back the Jesus at Mary Chain influence. This is definitely one of my favourite songs on the album. And while the whole album is enjoyable, and I do like some of the album tracks like Run and Hide and the aptly named closing track The End, I get the impression from these two Rat Cat releases that they're one of those bands whose singles vastly outweigh the rest of their catalogue in quality. And Tingles feels like one of those EPs where the artist clearly strived for all of the songs to be of equal quality, rather than one obvious single and a bunch of B-sides. While That Ain't Bad was the only song promoted from it, I feel like all of its songs could have gotten regular radio play, except My Bloody Valentine, which is probably a little too odd for radio. Also, Getting Away From This World would need a radio edit, but the rest could be played as is. The band's other significant weakness is that there is basically absolutely nothing deep about their lyrics. Out of both Blind Love and Tingles, there's maybe 2 songs with some ambiguity to the lyrics, but other than that, they're about as straightforward as you can possibly get. But if you've seen my other videos, then you might know that lyrics are pretty insignificant to me in the grand scheme of music, and apparently Australia felt that way about Rat Cat as well. And despite taking the country by storm, the band's follow-up album released just a year later saw them go from having a number 1 album to an album that didn't even chart in the top 100. Don't ask me why this happened though. Maybe you could go for the cliche and blame Nirvana for shifting focus towards even more underground bands, leaving this noisy but vastly more accessible band in the dust. But there's no real substantial background info out there about Rat Cat in general. I mean, their frontman, guitarist and songwriter doesn't even have a Wikipedia page. Maybe their rise could be explained as simply as pop stations taking notice of them because they were played on indie stations so much. But there's no real definitive answer for why they fizzled out so quickly. But Simon Day doesn't appear to have taken that personally.
You tend to get a lot of people who either like it or hate it. It's just kind of the way it is. Just got to ignore it, basically. I'm finding it fine. Don't let it worry me, otherwise I'd go crazy.
As he's carried on releasing a few things and performing music under the Rat Cat name with various lineup changes behind him since then. So that's Rat Cat. Trailblazers of Australian indie. Maybe even indie worldwide, but that could be a little too generous. They managed to avoid being one-hit wonders, and while their limited cultural impact since 1991 might leave them as one-year wonders instead, the fact that they held the number 1 single and album simultaneously shows that Rat Cat were indeed Australia's biggest band for at least a week. So there might not have been much I could have said, but I thought it was worth sharing their story anyway, as well as their music. Yeah, go and give them a listen. It might have been mind-blowing, but it should still be good, fun stuff. And as always, if you've made it this far into the video, thanks very much for watching.